Every year in November, we place a basket here by the altar, and in the basket we place slips of paper or envelopes with the names of those who are deceased. If you're not familiar with the practice, it's a beautiful practice for us to be a part of as Catholics, because what it does is it allows us, as we begin the month of November, we celebrated All Saints' Day. And I say thank you to all who came out. We had wonderful crowds to come to Mass on All Saints' Day. But then also we celebrated All Souls' Day. And that's the day on Wednesday of this past week we remembered all who have died. And maybe you were not able to come to the special Mass we had in the evening, but a good practice to get into is we all have someone that we know of who has passed away. So how do we continue to pray for that person? To pray that their soul goes to heaven. An active thing that we can do, something material, is to write their name down on a slip of paper, or the envelopes are on the back table, and we place it here in the basket. And then at every Mass throughout this whole month of November, we pray for all of those names that are there. We pray for all of the souls in a special way. You see, when we die, the big question does come up. Well, what happens? Where do we go? What happens to us in our lives? And really, we can remember that as Catholics, in our belief, we believe that we have that chance to kind of start walking on this bridge almost between heaven and earth. And that's called purgatory. And in that bridge, there's that opportunity to let go of whatever it was in this earth that has weighed us down, whatever baggage it is that we have, to have that opportunity to be purified in God's eyes. And purgatory is not hell, but rather purgatory is that chance of working towards heaven, to let go of those venial sins that we have perhaps committed throughout our lives. Because when we go through the gates of heaven, we don't want to be weighed down with hatred or with gossip or with bad memories or with jealousy. We don't want to be weighed down with the things in our life that we were always trying to perfect. So purgatory gives us that chance to be able to get there. So when we pray for all of the souls, we're praying that their journey through that purgation, that period of purgation, is one in which they will arrive inevitably at the time and the place and the kingdom of heaven. How long is purgatory? Well, we don't know. It could be a flash of an instant. It could be a longer period of time. But again, it's not where we're in hell, because hell is total separation and rejection from God. But rather, at least in purgatory, we're on our way to heaven. The scriptures today speak of people who had their eyes set on heaven. First of all, we had the story from Maccabees about the brothers who all were tortured. They were tortured by the earthly kingdom, but they really were not bothered by this torture because they knew that something greater and better was waiting for them. So they endured it. They said, you are not my earthly king. My king is God in heaven. And so as a result, they had hope for what the future held. Also, in the gospel reading today, we have a group of people, the Sadducees. Now remember, we often speak of the Pharisees. They're probably the most commonly spoken of group. The Pharisees are those who knew the law and were very strict with the law. But they were also very heretical with the law because of the fact that they held it over everybody else, and there was no mercy. There was no love. The Sadducees were the group of people, the Hebrew people, who they saw the Torah, or just the first 5 books of the Bible, as all there was. They didn't go beyond that. And so Jesus, in addressing them, has to address them in language that they understand. So today, as we hear them asking Jesus a rather absurd question, it's almost a riddle. Well, if a man's wife, if the brother dies, a man is married, he's the oldest of 7, and then each of the brothers, because according to their law, the brother would marry the widow in order to preserve the family name and the line of genealogy, etc. Well, whose wife will she be? It's an absurd question. So it's a question that people would ask of Jesus because they were trying to trick him. But he really doesn't give an answer except to say, when you're thinking of the afterlife and heaven, you have to think outside of what the earth has in store for you. So when you're thinking about heaven, we cannot think about it only in terms of what we know here on earth. What we have to think about is what God has in store for us there, where only his love is important. We're not worried about relationships. There's not a worry about what we have or do not have because of the fact that God takes care of all of our needs. So if we get to heaven and say, "Where is my wife?" Well, I'm not sure if that's a question we're going to be asking because we will be so filled with God and just so enamored by him, more than what our mind on earth can even picture, that we won't be asking that question. We might be asked, some people ask me as a priest sometimes, "Father, when I get to heaven, is my dog going to be there?" And I'm not giving an answer to that, except what I will say is that whatever it was here on earth that gave us joy and pleasure and that was good, we can only assume that those things will be there in heaven. And if you're there and asking where the dog is, well, guess what? You might not be in heaven. So you want to kind of realize that, because we're not going to be having those types of questions in heaven. Because God answers everything. We'll have a whole different way of being. We have our body, which is mortal, and God gave each one of us a soul which will go on forever. And the gift of that soul is that it's transformed even as we arrive at the gates of heaven. The soul is transformed. So the things that we knew here in this earth of the soul, in heaven it is purified, it is transformed. So we cannot take only what we know of here on earth and bring it there to heaven. A man died and his wife was all worried. She went to the priest and she said, "I'm really worried about my husband." And he said, "Well, why are you worried?" "Well, because, he died and, I just hope he went to heaven." And the priest said, "Well, just think, he was taken to heaven by throngs of angels." And she started crying. And the priest was kind of worried. So then she said, "Well, no, Father." She said, that makes me upset. And he goes, "Well, just think, your husband's going to meet up with thousands of martyrs, of those who gave their life for Christ." She cried even more. He said, "Oh, well, just think, there's all the multitude of the saints there in heaven to greet him and to surround him." And she was like inconsolable. And she said, "Father, he didn't like crowds." Well, you know what? If that's how you were here on earth, that doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be in heaven, because we're transformed. We're transformed, and those things that bothered us on earth will not bother us in heaven. Maybe you think of heaven as being bigger than everything here on earth. Well, if that's what you're thinking, we have to look beyond that. Maybe you think, "Oh, in heaven I'm going to have 20 cars, and I'm going to have 2,000 channels on my television." Well, bigger is not always better, because more cars means more traffic, and more channels on the television might mean that there's 24/7 endless cable news coverage of the same topic that goes on and on. So the thing is we can't think about it in those terms. We have to see it as placing our heart to God, praying for the souls that have gone before us, and saying, "Lord, one day I hope that I will have that opportunity to be there in heaven." And maybe it's a chance when we hear these readings to say, not about what the future holds, but what does today hold? What am I doing today? Because remember back in the Garden of Eden, that everything was great until they ate of the apple and they sinned. And then God couldn't find them, and he said to them, "Where are you?" I think that's a good question maybe for us to be worried about today. Not to be so consumed by the future, but to think, where am I at now? What are my actions saying about what I do each day? My moral actions, my relationship with God, the actions that I take, for instance, when I go to the voting booth. What happens when I myself take that opportunity to treat people in a way that maybe is not good? God is asking, every time we do something that brings us away from him, you can just hear his voice saying, where are you? Where are you? That's what forming the conscience is. I've talked about this before. I'll mention it again. Where are you? That's our responsibility to form the conscience and have the answers of what we know God is leading us to. He shouldn't have to be asking, where are you? Because really we should say, here I am, Lord. I come to do your will. Now, sometimes we worry about, well, when is it that I'm going to end up going to heaven, and will I be ready? Well, we cannot worry about that. We do not know the place, the time, nor the hour. So what we have to realize is every day we're called to live our life in our marriage, our family, our priesthood, our community, to the best that we can be. And when we are living that as a true disciple and following the Lord, well then, we shouldn't be too worried about what heaven up there is, because we're making some heaven here on earth. One priest was very worried about heaven, and he was praying a lot about it, and all he could think about was, in heaven, what are the golf courses going to be like? So he was all consumed by what the golf courses were like, and so he had this great time of meditation with God. And so God said to him, well, you know what? There in heaven, when you get to the golf course, it's going to have this beautiful, lush fairway. It's going to be the most magnificent that you've ever seen, with hills and trees and whatnot. And the priest was all excited in his prayer time. So then God said, well, when you get there to heaven, the greens are going to be nice and smooth. It's going to be like champagne kind of greens, beautiful there. And you'll be able to just hit your ball or go right into the hole. And the priest got all excited. And then the priest said, well, what else can you tell me about the golf courses in heaven? And God said, well, you have a tea time for a foursome next Saturday afternoon. Well, guess what? We may not all know when the day nor the hour is, but the bottom line is be prepared here and now.